The champagne glass sweated against Harper Lane's palm, and she set it down before the condensation could ruin the tablecloth someone had ironed within an inch of its life. Around her, 200 guests laughed at a joke the best man had already told twice, but the chair beside her stayed empty, exactly the way she had arranged it before anyone else sat down. She had chosen this table on purpose, close enough to the aisle to see everything, far enough from the head table that no one would expect her to smile for photographs. Her ex-boyfriend, Michael Reyes, had married someone named Paige 40 minutes earlier, and Harper had worn a dark green sleeveless dress specifically because it was the one color Michael had once told her washed her out. She had bought it 3 days after he ended things, hung it in the back of her closet, and told herself she would never actually wear it anywhere that mattered. Standing here now, watching him sign a marriage license in front of 200 witnesses felt like exactly the occasion that dress had been waiting for. But the empty seat beside her was not staying empty by accident. "Is this seat taken?" Harper looked up into a face she did not recognize and would not soon forget. Dark hair combed back without a single strand out of place, a charcoal suit that fit like it had been built around his shoulders that morning, and eyes so deliberately calm they made the rest of the wedding look loud by comparison. A thin silver ring sat on his right hand, plain, old, the kind of object that had clearly outlived whoever wore it before him. "I saved it for you," Harper said, because the sentence arrived in her mouth before she decided to say it, and because something about the stillness of him made lying feel pointless. He sat without hesitation, unbuttoning his jacket with one hand, and up close, she noticed the scar along his jaw, thin and pale, the kind a person stops explaining after enough years have passed. "Vincent Marchetti," he said. "I don't know a soul at this wedding except the groom's uncle, who owes me a conversation he has been avoiding for 6 months. "Harper Lane," she said. "I know the groom a little better than that. I dated him for 3 years. Something flickered behind Vincent's eyes. Not surprise exactly, more like a man recalculating a number. "Then you're either the bravest woman here or the one with the least reason to want to be." "Both," Harper said. "I catered small weddings before I opened my own event planning business 2 years ago. Michael's mother specifically requested this venue because I once told her at a dinner party that the acoustics here were terrible for a string quartet. I think she invited me to prove me wrong." "Were you wrong?" Harper glanced toward the quartet currently fighting the wind for control of a Vivaldi piece. "No." The corner of Vincent's mouth moved, not quite a smile, more like the ghost of permission for one. "I like people who are right and inconvenient about it." "That's most of my personality," Harper said, and for the first time since arriving, the tightness in her chest eased half a degree. They fell into a rhythm that surprised her, trading dry commentary on the toasts, on the flower arrangements that had clearly cost more than a used car, on the bridesmaid who kept checking her phone during the vows. Vincent spoke the way some men count money, careful, exact, never a word wasted, and Harper found herself watching his hands more than she meant to. Still, always still, even when the wind pulled at the tablecloth and sent someone's centerpiece rolling across the grass. She noticed, too, that he never once glanced toward his own phone, though she caught the outline of one in his breast pocket, and she filed that detail away without knowing yet why it mattered. Most men she had dated could not survive an hour without checking a screen. This one seemed content to let the world wait. It was during the father of the bride's speech that the first crack appeared in the afternoon's easy surface. A man in a gray suit approached their table from behind, too close, too fast, and Vincent's posture changed before Harper consciously registered the approach at all. He did not turn dramatically. He simply angled his shoulder a few inches, enough to put himself slightly between Harper and the stranger, a movement so small she almost missed it entirely. "Mr. Marchetti," the man said quietly, "a word when you have a moment." "I'm at a wedding, Salvatore." "It's about the shipment out of the harbor. It can't wait until Monday." Vincent's jaw tightened, the first genuine irritation Harper had seen cross his face all afternoon. "Then it will have to disappoint you," he said, "because right now I am occupied." Salvatore's eyes flicked to Harper, assessing, and something about the way he looked at her, like she was a variable someone had failed to account for, made the champagne in her stomach turn slightly cold. "Of course," Salvatore said, and retreated back through the crowd, though not before glancing over his shoulder twice. "Friend of yours?" Harper asked, keeping her tone light even as her pulse ticked upward. "Employee," Vincent said. "One who forgets that Saturday exists." "What kind of business gives you a wedding-crashing employee and makes you the kind of man who apparently needs 6 months to have one conversation with the groom's uncle?" Vincent studied her for a long moment, and Harper had the distinct sense of being weighed on a scale she could not see the numbers of. "The kind of business," he said finally, "that most people find easier not to ask detailed questions about." "I'm not most people." "No," Vincent agreed, something low and certain in his voice. "You're clearly not." She should have let it go there. Every instinct she owned told her that the polite, safe version of this conversation ended exactly at that sentence. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, arms crossed loosely, and said, "Try me anyway." Vincent's gaze held hers a beat longer than comfortable, and then he said, plainly, without performance, "I run an import business my family has held for 3 generations. Some of what we import is exactly what the paperwork says. Some of it is not. The men who work for me answer to rules that have nothing to do with the law and everything to do with loyalty. And I would imagine that sentence alone should be enough to send a smart woman looking for the nearest exit." Harper's pulse spiked, understanding arriving in one clean, cold drop, but she did not move. "You're telling me you're in the Mafia?" "I'm telling you," Vincent said, "that I don't lie to people who ask me directly, and that you asked directly." The quartet shifted into something slower. Around them, the reception carried on exactly as it had a minute earlier, oblivious, laughing, refilling glasses, but the table where Harper sat had gone very quiet, the air between her and Vincent Marchetti suddenly carrying a weight it had not held 60 seconds before. That was the moment everything about the afternoon changed, she would think later, though at the time all she registered was the steadiness of her own voice when she finally spoke again. "And you're telling me this at a stranger's wedding because—" "Because you saved me a seat," Vincent said, "before you knew who I was. And I find I would rather you know exactly who I am before you decide whether that seat stays saved." Harper looked at him for a long moment, weighing every reasonable argument for standing up and walking toward the bar, toward safety, toward an afternoon that made sense. Then she looked past him, toward the head table where Michael sat with his new wife's hand in his, laughing at something that had nothing to do with her anymore. And she thought about 3 years spent shrinking herself into a shape that fit someone else's comfort. She thought, too, about every man who had ever handed her a comfortable, ordinary version of himself and turned out to be lying about something smaller and less interesting than what Vincent had just admitted to her, voluntarily, unprompted, at a wedding where he owed her nothing at all. "I'm still here," she said. "For now," Vincent said. "Or for the rest of the reception." "Let's find out," Harper said, and reached for her champagne again, hand steadier than it had any right to be. The reception moved into dinner, and Harper noticed the way certain men positioned themselves at the edges of the tent, not dancing, not drinking, simply watching, the way security watches a room they are being paid to keep quiet. She had not clocked them before Vincent sat down beside her. Now she could not stop seeing them. "They're yours," she said quietly, cutting into a piece of chicken she had no appetite for. The men by the tent poles. Some of them, Vincent admitted. Weddings draw attention. Attention sometimes draws people I would rather not have anywhere near a room full of civilians. Is that why Salvatore came to bother you? Some kind of threat? Business complications, Vincent said, careful in the way of a man choosing which true thing to say. A rival family has been testing the edges of territory that belongs to mine. Nothing that requires your attention. You just told me you run smuggling operations at a wedding, Harper said. I think we're past the point of pretending I don't have questions. Something in Vincent's expression shifted, respect settling into the space where caution had been. The Castellano family, he said, believes my father's death 3 years ago left an opening they intend to exploit. They are wrong, but proving them wrong requires patience I am running low on. Your father died, Harper said, softer now. I'm sorry. He was murdered, Vincent corrected, flat and precise. No drama in it, only fact worn smooth from repetition. Ambushed outside a restaurant he ate at every Sunday for 20 years. I was supposed to be with him that night. I was late. Harper set down her fork. You blame yourself for being late. I don't discuss it, Vincent said, which was its own kind of answer, and Harper understood, with sudden clarity, that she had just been handed something he did not hand people casually. She thought about how easily she could have let that sentence pass, nodded, moved the conversation somewhere lighter and safer, and how instead, some part of her wanted to sit inside the discomfort of it with him, rather than steer them both away from it. The reception rolled forward into cake cutting and the first dance, golden light slanting low across the lawn, and Harper found herself laughing, actually laughing, at a story Vincent told about his grandmother threatening a health inspector with a rolling pin, and for a strange, suspended stretch of time, she forgot entirely that she had arrived at this wedding alone and dreading every minute of it. That was when the man from the gray suit returned, and this time he was not alone. 2 more men flanked him, and the easy hum of the reception seemed to dim by a fraction, guests nearby sensing a wrongness they could not name. Vincent was on his feet before Harper fully processed the shift, his body angled toward the newcomers with a stillness that had gone entirely predatory. Mr. Marchetti, Salvatore said, voice tight now, none of its earlier caution. The Castellanos are here, not invited, at the gate. How many? 4 cars. Vincent's jaw flexed once. Get the family inside, quietly. No panic, no scene. Just move them toward the house. Harper stood as well, heart hammering, but her mind, oddly, sharpened instead of scattering. The bridal party is still out by the arch for photos, she said. If your men move toward the gate, that's the direction they'll be walking in about 10 minutes for the sunset shots. Vincent's eyes cut to her, surprise flickering through the focus. You're right. Then let me handle the photographer, Harper said. I do this professionally. I can redirect 200 people toward the dance floor without anyone noticing they've been moved. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment I saved you a chair, Harper said, and did not wait for permission, already moving toward the small cluster of groomsmen loitering near the photography setup, her voice pitched into the same easy professional tone she used with difficult clients, herding, redirecting, buying time without anyone realizing they were being managed at all. Within minutes, the wedding party had been smoothly relocated toward the dance floor for a surprise announcement Harper invented on the spot about the couple's first dance being moved up, and the arch by the gate stood empty except for florists' leftover petals scattered across the grass. Vincent found her near the edge of the tent as his men fanned out toward the property line, low voices exchanging positions like men who had done this before and would do it again. That was fast thinking, he said. I plan events for a living, Harper said. Crisis management is half the job description. Nobody tells you that when a caterer cancels 40 minutes before doors open. You learn to move 200 people without them noticing they've been moved. I don't think I've met anyone who handled a Mafia standoff like a seating chart problem, Vincent said, and there was something almost warm underneath the words, something that had not been there an hour earlier. High praise, Harper said, from a man who apparently imports things that aren't on the paperwork. The tension broke for a moment, something charged and unspoken passing between them before Vincent's expression sobered again, attention pulled back toward the gate. Stay near the house, he said. Please. You said please, Harper noted. I didn't think that word was in your vocabulary. It isn't, generally, Vincent said, already turning away. You're making exceptions necessary. She watched him cross the lawn toward Salvatore, watched the 4 cars idling at the property's edge finally reverse and pull away without incident. Some message delivered or received that Harper was not privy to, and when Vincent returned 15 minutes later, tie loosened, jaw still tight, he found her exactly where he'd left her, refusing to hide indoors like a woman waiting to be told the danger had passed. They're gone, he said, for tonight. But not for good, Harper said. It wasn't a question. No, Vincent admitted, not for good. The reception limped back into its rhythm, guests none the wiser, the band picking up where it had left off. But something between Harper and Vincent had shifted into a register neither of them acknowledged aloud. They stood near the edge of the dance floor as the sun dropped lower, and when a slow song finally pulled couples onto the grass, Vincent extended his hand without a word. Harper looked at it for a long moment, looked at the silver ring on his finger, the scar along his jaw, the stillness that had covered something razor-sharp underneath all afternoon. She took his hand. They moved together carefully, not the practiced elegance of 2 people who had danced before, but something more deliberate, more aware, his hand steady at her waist, hers resting against a shoulder that had positioned itself between her and danger twice in one afternoon without asking permission first. You didn't run, Vincent said quietly, close enough that only she could hear it. I don't run from inconvenient things, Harper said. I told you that already. You could have, he said. The moment I told you what I was, you had every reasonable excuse to walk to your car and never think about this wedding again. I spent 3 years with a man who lied to me about smaller things than an entire criminal enterprise, Harper said. At least you told me the truth at the table instead of waiting until I found out the hard way. Something moved behind Vincent's eyes, old grief and fresh recognition tangled together. My father used to say the only currency that mattered was truth paid in full, up front, before anyone asked for change, he said. I don't offer that to many people. Why me? Because you saved a chair for a stranger before you knew what sitting in it would cost you, Vincent said. And because watching you organize an evacuation like a seating chart today told me more about your character than most people show in a year. The song ended. Neither of them stepped back right away. The Castellanos will try again, Harper said. Won't they? Almost certainly, Vincent said. And when they do, I would prefer you were somewhere I can guarantee your safety, rather than at the mercy of whatever venue books their reception hall. Is that your way of asking to see me again? It's my way of admitting I don't want this afternoon to be the only one, Vincent said, plain and unpolished in a way that suited him better than any smooth line could have. I'm aware of exactly how complicated that admission is, given everything you now know about who I am. Harper considered the man standing in front of her, considered the quiet, competent way he had moved his people into position without raising his voice once, considered the 3 years she had spent folding herself smaller so someone else could feel bigger, and found that fear and interest could apparently occupy the same space in her chest without canceling each other out. "Buy me dinner somewhere that isn't a wedding," she said. "Somewhere with fewer men in gray suits hovering by the exits." "I can manage that," Vincent said. And for the first time all afternoon, something close to a real smile touched his mouth. Brief, almost involuntary, gone as quickly as it arrived. 3 weeks later, Harper sat across from Vincent in a small, unmarked restaurant in a neighborhood she had never had reason to visit before. No photographers, no wedding guests, only the two of them and a bottle of wine he had chosen without consulting a menu. The owner had greeted Vincent by name at the door, an older man with flour still dusted on his forearms, and had waved off Vincent's attempt to pay for anything before they had even ordered. Harper noticed the way the staff moved around their table with a familiarity that had nothing to do with money changing hands, and understood, slowly, that respect in Vincent's world was a currency all its own, older and steadier than cash. She had learned, in those 3 weeks, that Salvatore's warnings were rarely dramatic and always accurate, that Vincent answered his phone at 3 in the morning more often than any ordinary businessman should, and that the Castellano family had not, in fact, given up as easily as that first retreat suggested. She had also learned, in smaller, quieter increments, the shape of the man underneath the stillness, that he called his mother every Sunday without fail, that he read 3 newspapers before most people finished their coffee, that he had not smiled, genuinely, without reservation, more than a handful of times since she had met him, and that each time felt like something rare enough to remember precisely. "They made an offer today," Vincent said, turning his wine glass slowly by its stem. "A meeting. A chance to settle the territory dispute without further complications." "You don't trust it?" "I don't trust anything that arrives wrapped in the word settle," Vincent said, "but refusing the meeting entirely would be read as weakness, and weakness invites exactly the kind of complications I'm trying to avoid." Harper studied him across the candlelight, noting the tension that had settled permanently into his shoulders over the past 3 weeks, the way he now checked the street through the restaurant window every few minutes without seeming to realize he was doing it. "You're going," she said. It wasn't a question. "Tomorrow night. Neutral ground. Their territory, technically, which is its own kind of message." "That sounds like a terrible idea." "It's the only idea that doesn't end in more bodies," Vincent said, and something in the flatness of the statement told Harper he had already run through every other option and discarded them one by one. "I want to come." Vincent's eyes snapped to hers, sharp with immediate refusal. "Absolutely not." "You said it yourself. Weakness invites complications. What message does it send if you walk into a room with the Castellanos looking rattled and alone, versus walking in with someone at your side who clearly isn't afraid of them?" "It sends the message that I have something else to lose," Vincent said, "which is precisely the leverage I do not want to hand them." "They already know about me," Harper said quietly. "Salvatore told you the men at the gate asked who I was before they left. You think a family capable of that kind of reconnaissance hasn't already built a file on the woman who redirected 200 wedding guests in 10 minutes flat?" Vincent's silence told her she was right before he said anything at all. "Then hiding me changes nothing except making me look like something to hide," Harper pressed. "Let me come, not into the room, somewhere close enough that if something goes wrong, I'm not sitting at home finding out secondhand." "This isn't a negotiation you have standing to enter," Vincent said, echoing, without realizing it, an argument every overprotective man in every dangerous story eventually reaches for. "I plan events attended by 400 strangers for a living," Harper said. "I read rooms and I read people, and I have been right about every single instinct I've had since the day I met you. Let me be useful instead of decorative." Something in Vincent's expression cracked open, the particular vulnerability of a man unused to being argued with successfully. "If anything happens to you," he said, low, "I don't know what I become." "Then let's make sure nothing does," Harper said, "together, instead of you carrying all of it alone the way you've clearly been doing since your father died." He did not answer right away, and Harper let the silence sit rather than filling it, some instinct telling her that this particular quiet was the sound of a man rearranging a lifetime of certainty around one exception he had not planned for. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost some of its earlier edge. "My father kept everyone at arm's length," he said. "My mother included, most of the time. He believed proximity to him was a liability to anyone who loved him, and in the end, he was proven right in the worst possible way. I have spent 3 years building the same distance around myself, telling myself it was wisdom rather than fear." He looked at her steadily. "You have made it very difficult to maintain." "Good," Harper said simply, and reached across the table to still his hand where it had been turning the wine glass without pause for the last several minutes. "Difficult isn't the same as wrong." The meeting took place the following evening in a banquet hall on the edge of Castellano territory, half lit, tension coiled tight enough that Harper could feel it the moment she stepped through the side entrance Vincent's men had cleared for her, positioned close enough to see the room, but far enough to remain, technically, uninvolved. She watched through a gap in a service door as Vincent walked into the room alone, spine straight, hands loose and visible. The same stillness she had first noticed across a wedding reception, now weaponized into something colder and more deliberate. Dominic Castellano sat at the head of a long table, older than Vincent by perhaps 15 years, silver at his temples, a smile that did not travel anywhere near his eyes. "Vincent," he said, "I'm told you brought company tonight." "I came alone into this room," Vincent said, "as agreed." "And yet," Dominic's gaze flicked toward the service entrance, and Harper's stomach dropped as she realized, with cold clarity, that the file Salvatore had warned about was more thorough than either of them had anticipated. "The woman from the wedding. Miss Lane, is it? Event planner. Quite resourceful from what my people tell me." Harper's pulse spiked, but she did not retreat, some instinct rooted deeper than fear keeping her rooted to the small gap in the doorway. "She has nothing to do with this discussion," Vincent said, voice gone dangerously flat. "On the contrary," Dominic said, leaning back. "She has everything to do with it. A man distracted by something new to protect makes decisions he would not otherwise make. I am simply curious how distracted you currently are." "You want to test that theory?" Vincent said. "You're welcome to try. But I'd think carefully about what happens to a negotiation once you've made the mistake of threatening something outside its terms." Harper made her decision in the space of a single breath, stepping through the service door before caution could argue her out of it, walking directly into the banquet hall with the same brisk, unbothered confidence she used when a wedding seating chart collapsed 40 minutes before doors opened. "Mr. Castellano," she said, before Vincent could stop her, "I understand you've done some research on me. I'd be happy to save your people the trouble of digging further. I run an event planning company. I have no connection to any organization, no leverage to offer you, and no intention of becoming a bargaining chip in whatever this is. If you're looking for a distraction to exploit, I'm afraid you've overestimated my relevance to this conversation." The room had gone entirely still, every man at that table recalculating in real time. Dominic studied her for a long moment, something between amusement and reassessment moving across his features. "Bold," he said, "for a woman standing in a room she was asked not to enter." "I wasn't asked," Harper said evenly. "I was warned. There's a difference. and I decided the warning didn't apply to me since I'm not part of your territory dispute." Vincent's jaw was tight enough to crack, but something in his eyes, watching her hold that room without flinching, carried an emotion far past irritation. Dominic laughed, short and genuine, the first unguarded sound he had made since Harper walked in. "Vincent," he said, "you found yourself someone with more nerve than half the men in your organization." He waved a hand, dismissive, almost bored. "The territory stands as it is for now. I did not come here tonight to start a war over lines on a map neither of us can afford to redraw right now. Consider this evening a test, and consider it passed for both of you." The tension in the room broke like a held breath finally released, and Vincent's men, positioned discreetly around the hall's perimeter, visibly relaxed by fractions too small for the Castellanos to register. Dominic rose, buttoning his jacket with an unhurried formality that suggested the danger, for tonight at least, had genuinely passed, and extended a hand toward Vincent that Vincent, after a beat, accepted. "Give my regards to your mother," Dominic said. "She always did make the better cannoli. Tell her I said so, and tell her I still hold a grudge that she never shared the recipe." "I'll pass along the insult," Vincent said, exactly as delivered. Outside, once the cars had pulled away and the banquet hall's lights had dimmed behind them, Vincent turned on Harper with an intensity that made the parking lot feel considerably smaller than it was. "That was reckless," he said. "That was effective," Harper said. "He backed down." He could have decided differently, in half a second, in a room full of men who answer to him and not to any law either of us could call for help. "But he didn't," Harper said, steady despite the adrenaline still working through her hands. "Because I gave him a reason not to make this personal, and because you'd already made it clear that threatening me came with consequences he wasn't prepared to pay for tonight." Vincent stared at her for a long moment, something raw moving behind the careful composure he wore like armor. "I have spent 3 years building walls specifically so that no one could ever again be used against me the way my father's enemies used the people around him," he said. "Tonight, you walked directly into the one room I most needed you to stay out of. And you were right to do it, and I don't know how to hold both of those truths at the same time." "You don't have to hold them alone," Harper said. "That's the whole point." Something in Vincent finally, visibly, gave way, the last careful distance between them collapsing as he closed the space and kissed her there in the empty parking lot. No audience, no performance, only the same deliberate certainty he brought to everything else. And Harper met it without hesitation, hands fisting in the lapels of a suit that had been perfectly pressed 6 hours earlier and now bore the creases of an entirely different kind of evening. When they finally broke apart, Vincent rested his forehead against hers, breathing unsteady in a way she suspected very few people had ever witnessed. "This isn't a safe thing to want," he said quietly. "No," Harper agreed. "It really isn't." "I'm asking anyway," Vincent said. "Stay. Not because tonight was dangerous and adrenaline is doing the talking. Because I have not stopped thinking about a woman who saved a stranger a chair since the moment she did it, and I find I have no intention of giving that up simply because the truth of who I am should reasonably frighten her away." Harper thought about 3 years of shrinking herself smaller for a man who never once fought for a single thing she wanted, thought about the empty chair she had saved on a whim that afternoon, thought about a banquet hall full of dangerous men who had underestimated her completely. "I'm staying," she said, "but you don't get to make unilateral decisions about my safety again without asking me first. I proved tonight I can hold my own in a room full of people who wanted me gone." "Understood," Vincent said, and there was something almost like reverence in the word, a man recalibrating every assumption he had carried into that parking lot. In the weeks that followed, the fragile peace with the Castellanos held, tested occasionally by small provocations that never quite escalated into the war both sides had spent years half expecting. Harper kept her business, kept her apartment, kept the particular independence she had fought to build in the 3 years since Michael had made her feel invisible in her own relationship. But she found her calendar increasingly shaped around dinners in the back room of the restaurant, with flour on the owner's forearms. Around Sunday phone calls she now sometimes overheard from the next room. Around a man who called her exactly when he said he would, and never once left her wondering where she stood. Salvatore, to Harper's quiet amusement, eventually stopped treating her like a variable to be managed, and started treating her like someone whose instincts were worth consulting before a decision was finalized, rather than after. He brought her small updates now, not because Vincent instructed him to, but because he had learned, watching her redirect 200 guests and hold a banquet hall full of armed men without flinching, that underestimating her cost more than it saved. Harper never asked for that respect directly. She simply kept being right, often enough that withholding it stopped making sense to anyone paying attention. She still thought sometimes about the version of herself who might have declined the invitation to Michael's wedding altogether, who might have sent a gift and stayed home rather than sit through an afternoon designed to remind her of everything she had lost. That version of her would never have known Vincent Marchetti existed, would never have learned what it felt like to be looked at by a man who told the truth first and asked forgiveness never, because he rarely needed to. She did not regret the version of the story where she had shown up in the dark green dress and dared the day to do its worst. Months later, Harper would think back on that wedding often, on the empty chair beside her, and the stranger who had asked if it was taken, and she would remember, with a clarity that never quite faded, the exact moment she had chosen to answer honestly instead of politely. She had saved that seat for no one in particular, out of pure defiance against a day designed to make her feel forgotten. What she had gotten instead was a man who never once let her feel small again, and a truth she carried forward without regret. Some seats are worth saving, even when you do not yet know who is coming to claim them.